In Canada, there are approximately 35,000 sudden cardiac arrests per year. Worldwide, sudden and unexpected cardiac death accounts for 17 million deaths every year. That's more than any other cause of death. The chances of surviving a sudden cardiac arrest are approximately 1 in 10. But with immediate attention, rapid transportation, and in many cases luck, survival is possible. Earlier this year I met two incredible people, Rob and Ted, and they each had an amazing story to tell. And while everybody's stories are very unique and very individual and personal to them, I did note that there were certain similarities between their stories and my story. For example, we had all at one time been very serious and dedicated athletes, and we had all experienced sudden cardiac arrest. And as I listened to their stories, I was really able to relate and reflect upon what I had gone through. And so with that in mind, I asked them if I could share their stories with a wider audience. This video is the result of that, and I hope that at least somebody watching will get the same inspiration as I did when I first heard their stories, and will realise that sudden cardiac arrest is not always the end. In fact, sometimes it's the beginning.
I'm Ted Galloyne. I'm currently 68, and 8 years ago when I just turned 60, I had a sudden cardiac arrest during a half marathon.
I'm Andrew Rosbrook. I am 56 years of age, and about 8.5 years ago I had a cardiac arrest within the last 300 meters of a half marathon race that I was running.
Hi, I'm Rob. This is my story.
How old are you, Rob?
I'll be 53 next week. I used to be a triathlete, and I was in great shape. My last triathlon was 13 years ago tomorrow, and I didn't quite make the finish line. I had a sudden cardiac arrest right at about 50 yards from the finish line. Apparently I was vital signs absent for 8 minutes, something like that. Well, I don't quite remember how long it was. From the story they tell me, they gave me one last shock with a defibrillator to see if I'm going to be an organ donor or come back, and I came back. So the story goes, I went from this awful gray color, just a flush of red back into me. And this was, 2 or 3 days before my 40th birthday.
Well, I should probably tell you a bit of the backstory, which was that in May of that year, which is 2013, I had started experiencing angina. And I had, I don't know if I'd ever experienced it before. I had chest pains, but I always thought it was indigestion. But this was something that happened during a run, a typical 10K that I used to do every day at lunchtime. And I stopped and it went away, and I continued and went faster, and my heart rate went up to 162 and nothing happened. So I sort of discounted it. Next day I went out again with some other guys, and the same thing happened, and that bothered me. I thought maybe it was a chest strap I was wearing, but anyways, I went and saw Dr. Fred, and Dr. Fred was concerned and said, well, in spite of my comments about you doing a stress test every day, I think we should send you in for a stress test. Which I did, and I passed the stress test with flying colors in terms of I did the distance, and I did the METs were very high. There was no chest pain, and blood pressure was just great, yet there was a 2-centimeter depression in the ST on my ECG, which is indicative of ischemia, or cardiac ischemia, and arterial sclerosis. The cardiologist looking at all this and giving my test results, said, you know, you've got arteriosclerosis, but given your performance on the treadmill and given how much you run and stuff, he estimated that the probability of a major cardiac event over the next 3 years was 3%. So 3%, what the heck is that? That's lottery stuff. But it said, you know, you should keep your heart rate down, keep it below 120, and prescribed, you know, baby aspirin, and put me on statins, and gave me some nitroglycerin. He said, if you're running, just take pop a pill.
I've been running kind of pretty much since I was 10 years old, and when I was in my teenage years and early 20s, I was a really serious, dedicated runner, and I would train very hard, and then that's kind of slacked off in my 20s and 30s, and then I picked it up again more intensively in my 40s, and so I was set up to run a half marathon in Toronto on May the 5th at 2013, and I was training pretty steadily towards that. A year before, I had gone to the doctor, and we've measured my cholesterol and my blood pressure, and both of them were high. So at that time, bearing in mind that I was running ultra marathons and I was training sort of, you know, running 80 to 100 kilometers a week just in training, and my diet was not too bad. You know, I was doing a lot of things right, but my blood pressure and my cholesterol were both still high. And my doctor advised me to exercise more and to eat better, and really I kind of tried to indicate to him in the conversation that that wasn't too helpful. I did explain that I was running, you know, 80 to 100 kilometers a week, and he said, well, exercise more. My advice to anyone else who sort of, you know, does have concerns for their own cardiac health, at that point I wish that I had kind of pushed the issue, and I wish that I had discussed medications. I think that, you know, there's a certain amount that you can do to reduce cholesterol with diet, but there's also an element, a pretty large element, that you're not going to be able to control.
I never had any indication that there was a problem. You know, I was in good shape, running, biking, swimming, the whole bit.
So no, like previous doctor's appointment, no high blood pressure?
No, just family history of high cholesterol, that's it. The doctor says I threw the short end of the genetic stick when it came to cholesterol numbers. So it was a 2-week stint in the hospital while they did an electrical study on me, which resulted in a ICD being implanted. I had an angiogram actually on my 40th birthday. I spent it,
Happy birthday.
Yeah, clamped to a table in the hospital. That was fun.
Yeah.
Memorable 40th birthday. It's the following year when I was trying to enter a triathlon again. The electrician ordered some more tests and discovered that I had a different issue. I had a congenital valve issue, so I had a bivalve for my aortic thing, and the heart was enlarged and all that to compensate. So they, subsequent to that, in 2009, I think, in June-ish, I had open heart surgery for valve replacement at that time, and they removed the ICD. So I went on for another 12 years. Yeah, 12 years getting checked regularly with echoes to see heart function, valve function. Yeah, always good. You know, I was back to riding my bike. After the first surgery, I was back to riding my bike probably within 3 months.
I really did try. I started to warm up before runs, thinking it might dilate the blood vessels, and this wouldn't happen. backed off running fast. I started walking home from work, and yada yada. And meeting with the cardiologist, he said, in time, given your situation, the collateral blood vessels will take over that job, and you could be okay. So I began to bank on that the collateral blood vessels in the heart would take over from this blocked artery with a 3% probability of something major happening. So I'd run, I cycled, I climbed Mont Ventoux on a whim one day on a bike and alone, and there was no angina. There was I did a Grand Fondo like you did. I did 150 kilometers or something, and had a 30 kilometers an hour average, and nothing. So in my thinking, I was kind of finished with this in a dumb way. I had this half marathon coming up. It was in November 3rd in Hamilton. My daughter and I had this competition going where I was handily beating her, and she's 36 years my junior, but I was beating her, and I hadn't really trained for this one. So I thought, this will be fun. I'll just relax. She's going to beat me. I'm happy with this. And I went to the cardiologist and said, I got this half marathon coming up in 4 days. What do you think? And he said, well, just use your common sense. Don't overdo it. I said, perfect. That's the plan.
Do you remember right up until you collapsed?
Yes, I remember. You kind of come around the corner and you see the corral and the finish line and the timer and all that. And all I could think of was, suddenly I feel a little out of breath.
Yeah.
So I thought, I guess it's okay if I just sort of slow down and saunter across the finish line, but I didn't make it. I don't remember falling down or anything, but apparently it was quite dramatic. Boom. I was having a good race. I was coming around the corner, looking at the time, thinking how I did and what I had to do. I had to go home, pack the car, go camping after that, and I didn't, of course, made it. I had a trip to the hospital instead. I had been, even 100 yards further back, I would have been toast.
Right.
Because no crowds there.
Yeah.
But I was coming up to the finish line, so there's all kinds of crowds. The St. John's ambulance guys were there with all the stuff, and there was cardiologists in the audience who jumped in. Well, I didn't get any stents. Immediately it was B12 shot, hydration issue, make sure I'm fully hydrated.
Yeah.
And outside of that, it was just put me on a monitor. And
Right.
At the Guelph Hospital, there was a whole lot of this. And then, of course, they asked me all these questions. Do you have any chest pain? I was like, well, yes, because they did CPR. Were you ever short of breath? I was like, well, I was running. So yeah, I was short of breath.
Yeah.
The race started. I remember all this so vividly. The race started, and we chatted as we ran along the escarpment looking over Lake Ontario and Toronto in the distance. And then she slowly began to move ahead, and I think it's the Lincoln Alexander Parkway we're running down, which is gives a panoramic view of the lake, and I could see her bobbing away ahead of me in this little pink jacket, and she was gone. And that was fine. And I remember running down that thinking, this is such a wonderful day. This is such a beautiful course going down the hill. I remember conversations people were having as I passed them and they passed me. And then I remember running along the lake. The lake is on my left side now, because I'm heading towards St. Catharines in the finish line. The escarpment's on my right. And I remember the sun dappling through the leaves and brightening up the path we're on. And then I woke up 2 days later in a hospital. So that was, I had no signs or symptoms or indication that day that anything was going to happen.
So
Plus,
there were none of the angina feelings you've been having?
I didn't have those for over a month.
Oh, okay.
And nothing that day in particular. So I remember thinking to myself, I'm very close to the finish line, it's time to kick it up. And looking at my Garmin heart rate and the pace, I did pick up the pace. And I think didn't help. But I was about 250 meters from the finish line. So I was fortunate enough to fall where I did because it was near the medical tent. The medical tent was just over just a little small rise. And the other fortunate thing was that there was a competitive swimmer who was watching for his wife. He ran out and started CPR along with a pregnant nurse. And that was pretty immediate. And in front of me was a physician who turned around and stopped, grabbed me as I hit the ground. So I did smack the ground, but she was there. There was a physician walking her dog with an EpiPen. So she came over, identified herself, and whacked me with the EpiPen. So CPR was started, I'm told, almost immediately. And someone ran to the medical tent, which was probably 200 meters away, not very far. And they came over and joined the CPR with a emerge nurse who I met later, but who was determined. She'd seen so many people die in hospital from this that she said, not this guy today.
Then even when I stood on the start line that morning of the race, I kind of looked around me at the other people, who were near me, and they all looked like runners, and I kind of felt like a bit of a fraud. Just had this sort of, although I didn't feel anything wrong, I didn't feel any issues, I just didn't feel right about the situation. And then as the race went on, I looked at my watch. I was really, as many people are, I was a slave to the watch, to the pace I was setting. And I was aiming to do 4:17 per kilometre. And I'm looking at the watch, and it was up around 4:28, and I felt as though I was pushing fairly hard. So I couldn't really understand why that would be. Eventually you come to a big downhill at a place called Rosedale Valley Road, and I thought, well, that's going to pick up my speed. So I pushed down Rosedale Valley Road, and I looked at my speed again when we got towards the bottom, and I was then into the 4:31, 4:32 per kilometre. So there was seriously something not quite right. But I just, sometimes it's not your day, and I just decided, well, I was going to keep pushing as hard as I could, but it wasn't going to be a day that I was going to do a personal best time. And then at about 15 kilometres, the race turns pretty abruptly westwards and follows along parallel to the lake. And it's about that time that I just have lost all memory. So I don't remember running in that race after 15 kilometres. So the rest of the story, or the rest of this part of the story, I really have to rely on eyewitnesses. So somehow I got myself from 15 kilometres to around about the 21 kilometre, almost the finish. And a police officer who was on duty reported hearing this blood-curdling scream coming from one of the spectators. And that scream was let out when they saw me just completely flop and break my fall with my chin. Anyway, thankfully that police officer was there, but also in the crowd cheering on their respective partners were a general practitioner, so a family doctor, and a ER surgeon. So I had these two trained medical professionals there. I had the police officer there, and then a fourth person turned up who was a firefighter. So I had just about the best spontaneous care that it would be possible to have. And they rolled me over, and one of the doctors, despite the blood all over my face, started giving me artificial respiration, while the others all were giving me CPR. And of course, having the police officer there with the radio was great, because then they were able to call for further medical assistance, and they called for two paramedics who were on bicycles, who got there And I've heard reports of somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes after I'd initially gone down, and the pads were put on my chest from the AED. I was given one shock and I immediately sprung to life and my heart started beating again.
And then finally they brought the AED over from the medical tent, but they couldn't get a pulse. It didn't work.
Right.
Like, it worked, but it wasn't strong enough, I guess.
Yeah.
And after 15 minutes of this CPR and stuff, the ambulance came and they loaded me in the ambulance, and their defibrillator got a pulse on the way to the hospital. They don't really know what caused the ventricular fibrillation. So the heart was just doing the jello thing. It was beating, but it wasn't pumping. They don't know what really caused that. It could have been a blood clot. It could have been just simple that the demands of the heart at that point were not being met by that vein, that artery rather, and it went into fibrillation that way. So they don't really know what happened. The heart wasn't damaged, so they're saying, don't think it was a heart attack,
Right.
but just you went from an oxygen-starved heart into fibrillation and cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
But the fact was that they did do it at the hospital, an angiogram, and found that the LAD artery, the lower anterior descending artery, was 95 plus blocked.
Right.
And the cardiologist there was incensed. I'd never seen, I'd seen him angry before because this was his unit, but he was incensed that my cardiologist had given me permission to run a marathon. He said that was insane.
So was the blockage just from cholesterol buildup, or was it from the cholesterol breaking off?
It was from its buildup.
Right.
Its buildup, and it was in a funny spot where there was a joint or a Y section here, and it was you couldn't go in with a stent. That would have been the option, was just a stented thing, but because of where it was located, they couldn't do that. They went in there with the heart still beating, and they bypassed the LAD with my memory artery. So they just stuck an artery that was supposed to feed over here and stuck it in there and closed her up. And
Yeah, so I've been monitored to see how the heart is functioning, the valve was functioning, because I had a prosthetic valve put in the first time. Bovine valve. And they said that, of course, I hadn't actually seen a doctor in 2 years because COVID.
Yeah.
But they said that the calcification was increasing on the aortic valve again. So it was getting a bit stenotic.
But they would expect that to happen.
Yeah, they would expect that to happen. It was probably about 3 years earlier than I was hoping for. I was hoping to get 15 years out of the cow valve.
Yeah.
And now I have a mechanical valve.
Well, when I did eventually wake up in hospital, my wife was there, and a really good friend of mine was there, and a good friend of mine was telling me that this was absolutely a massive event, and it was a very, very dramatic event. Then the cardiologist came in, and I said to him, I'm gathering this was pretty major, and he said, no, not at all, because from a medical point of view, it was actually pretty straightforward. I had a build-up of plaque on one of my arteries, and I guess it had been perhaps the cause of what was taking that little bit of extra zip out of my running in recent months, and also in the race, as blood wasn't flowing quite as efficiently as it could. But then in the race, because my blood was pumping through so hard, because I was pushing so hard, it actually blew the plaque off the wall of the artery, and it formed a blockage, and the estimate was a 97% blockage of that artery. Nothing else was affected apart from that one artery. So after they'd done their initial tests, they put a stent into that artery, they open it up, and that solved the problem.
I don't think I really approach it differently. I'm just more cautious. So, especially now with the mechanical valve, which implanted about 8.5 months ago.
Right.
I have to take the warfarin, so I'm more cautious on hitting things. Yeah, and then of course the last time around was over Christmas. Yeah, I went in, surgery was December 15th. I got home on the 22nd maybe. I spent Christmas at Christmas Day at home, and I got rebounded back to the hospital a few days, 2 or 3 days after Christmas. I was only home for 4 or 5 days.
Right.
I'd gone out for a walk to the end of the street and back to recover, and my wife went up for a nap, and I go, okay, I'm just going out to the end of the street and back. It's about, I don't know, 200 yards maybe, and I didn't make it back.
Full out collapse?
I full out collapsed, blacked out, the whole bed hit my head. So off to the hospital I go, but my heart wasn't beating properly, which is actually subsequent research that it's fairly common to require a pacemaker after that surgery.
Right.
So I got fitted for a new pacemaker, so I'm back on the electrical service again.
So were you off pacemaker for a while?
I had a ICD implanted for 9 months between my first event and my first surgery.
Right.
That's when I had the ICD.
Ah, okay.
And then they took the ICD out because they didn't figure I needed it anymore. And I was quite happy about that.
Do you feel the pacemaker?
I think I can, but I probably don't. It is just all in my head, but I can actually feel the wires and stuff.
Right.
I don't like touching it, but I can feel the wires, but I don't feel it going off.
I went back the day of my race, so a year later, so November 3rd. I used my GPS coordinates from the watch to find out where I dropped. So now I sat there looking at the spot thinking, this has got to evoke some memories or at least an emotion.
Yeah.
But nothing, it was just flat.
Enjoy.
Yeah, I looked at the race photo and I'm crossing a orange bridge that you'd see if you went on the QEW towards St. Catharines. There's an orange bridge, footbridge. And I look at that picture and I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out, okay, that must have been taken. Looking at my GPS route here, it was taken then, and that was 34 minutes before I dropped. And I looked pretty good. There was no discussion about anything really. It was, I had met with a social worker, which I thought I was confused by. Why am I here? I am in the cardiac intensive care unit, and I was actually doing laps around the unit, thinking I'm going to lose my edge here. So I was in my gown, my bum hanging out, walking around as fast as I could. Actually, I was shuffling around the unit down the halls, thinking I got to keep my legs going because.
So you were training?
I was trying to keep my training up. It's silly. I didn't understand why I was meeting a social worker, but I went along with it, and she took me to a staircase and said, okay, I want you to climb the stairs, because I kept saying to her, I want to get back to running. How soon can I get back to running? She said, well, climb the stairs. And I'll tell you, Andrew, I was crying by the time I got to the first landing because I couldn't do it. Like, it was just impossible. And so she started consoling me, saying that, hey, come on. But that was it. It was all the physical aspects of recovery from surgery that was the focus here, not on what happened 3 days prior out in that course, which hit me like a rock when I got home. I find it hard to say that I've suffered trauma only because I have no memory of anything happening, right?
Right.
So it's not like I was in a car crash and I get to relive those images of the car spinning or something.
And what about a sense of life will never be the same again?
I certainly had all that, and You know, my therapy was writing about it. And if I look back at my early writings, yeah, I was suffering.
Right.
I felt my body had let me down, and my heart in particular let me down. At an embarrassing way too, because I was a runner. That was one part of it. The other part was just that it let me down, and I saw all of a sudden I felt very vulnerable. I didn't feel very competent. It was very destabilizing for me. And so as my heart recovered, I mean, my heart recovered a lot faster than I did. My heart was good. I was starting to walk again. In fact, I was starting to run again, go to the Y and get on the bikes and stuff like that, and the treadmill and the track and all that kind of stuff. But I was mentally, I was a mess. I don't feel that way anymore. I mean, it's with every year, it just got, I look back and think, like, what was that all about?
Yeah.
You know, I can kind of understand it intellectually, but
Yeah.
a lot of the emotion is dissipated and it's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And I remember also thinking that, which I've subsequently found out is a side effect of trauma, that I wasn't the same person I was prior to this. That somehow something had changed. I could never put a finger on it, and that bothered me for a long time. But again, that totally disappeared too, and I think, what was that about?
I stayed in the hospital for 3 days, in which time they were monitoring me, making sure that everything was fine. They had put me on medications, and I guess they had to make sure that they didn't have any adverse reaction with me. And then after 3 days, I was released from the hospital and given some medications and given prescriptions and given appointments for follow-ups, and was told that I could exercise right from the word go, but that exercise should not take the form of running. I should just limit it to nice gentle walking, and also I wasn't allowed to drive for a month. So I went home and I was walking 2 or 3 hours every day. I'd go for 4 or 5 kilometers, and then I'd sit somewhere and read or Google or whatever, and that's how my days went for the first month. And then after a month, and I measured it to the day, I put on my running shoes and I put on my heart rate monitor, and I stuffed my pockets full of various different identifications and contact numbers just in case something happened. And I went out for my first run, which was exactly 5 kilometers. I had my watch on my wrist to measure my heart rate, and it must have just taken a moment to calibrate. So I looked at it after 50 yards of running, and it was saying it was 170 beats per minute. And then I kind of think, well, I'm feeling fine, and then I looked at it a few seconds later and it was 195, and I'm like, this can't be right, I don't feel any ill effects. And then all of a sudden it dropped right back down to 84 beats per minute. But there was a moment where, although I knew it couldn't be 195, there was a little bit of me that was thinking, well, maybe is it?
I had it in my head that I would go back to Hamilton and actually finish that race, but I forgot that I guess I overlooked the fact that my wife has a memory of this and my daughter have a memory of this too, and they were there, and my daughter was at the finish line waiting for me to turn up, thinking, it's hour 45, where is he? And my wife, she was expecting kind of to see me, but maybe not, and they met up and said, where is he? And they went to the medical tent and said, he's in the ambulance, it's just leaving now. So my idea when I was proposing to her that I wanted to do a half marathon, just to show that I could do a half marathon, it wasn't well received.
Yeah.
It's funny though, looking back, I bought this for that exact reason, because every time I went for a run along out that way, I thought, I may not come back, and I'm not going to inflict that on my wife, so I'm going to buy this thing so at least they can figure out who I am and who to contact.
Yeah.
So I stayed on roads so that people would see me drop. It took a long time to get the confidence back that it's not going to happen. It's just magical thinking. I think I'm back to I don't even think about it much anymore, to be honest with you. I mean, I got the road ID, and I have 2 of them now because so they can counterbalance each other and just keep sliding around. But
Did you always wear a heart rate monitor?
yeah,
But more for training zones?
it was most for training. It was, largely it just made recording the run easier than I used to write it down.
Yeah.
I will, when I'm finished a run, text my wife to say I'm walking home, but that's me being more sensitive to she might be concerned, than me being concerned.
What's your resting heart rate?
Nowadays, 35.
Yeah.
It used to be, before all this happened, was 48.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty good, but with the softball now, it can go down to 30, and it feels like I'm...
And I guess that you do carry a few elements of paranoia with you. Like every now and again I'll lift a box and I might get a little tweak, or a tweak in my neck or my chest or an arm even, and then you're kind of left wondering, is that a tweak? Is that a muscle, or is that my heart? And so, I mean, that's something that I've kept with me, that slight paranoia. And it is now, I mean, we're 8.5 years later, it is incredibly slight. There was a situation a couple of weeks ago where I pushed myself really hard on a bike ride, and I was puffing and panting, and I was kind of feeling a little nauseous. And so I did what I do now, which is I pulled over to the side of the road and I looked at my heart rate, and it was 145. So I knew that everything was fine, and I just waited a couple of minutes and let my heart rate come down. That's the sort of thing that previously I would have pushed through. But beyond that, I mean, I don't spend my days obsessing about what happened to me. There was that period, obviously, initially where I was sorting things out mentally, and I've kind of come to terms with all of that. And so now I just really just live every day, and I carry on as if nothing had happened, but always with that little alarm bell should something feel not quite right.
Yeah. I remind that I'm grateful to still be here. So it was after my first event. Since then I met my wife and then got married to my wife.
Yeah.
Same woman both times. So it's like in that sense, it's like a new start, I guess.
Yeah. Simple things, I guess, are that I take medications every single day. One of those medications, bisoprolol, can cause fatigue and tiredness, and I think it does. And so, I often find myself, much more weary and prone to falling asleep in the evening. Although that could just be age, I guess. I mean, I am 56 now, so that's one thing. My diet hasn't changed too drastically. It wasn't terrible before. I certainly don't obsess over having had a cardiac arrest. I don't think about it too often. Obviously, every time I make a video, I call myself the cardiac cyclist, so that kind of is a reminder. And I do like, if it's appropriate, to put elements in my videos reflecting on my medical history and on my cardiac arrest, and obviously this video is specifically about that. But on a regular day-to-day basis, I'm not dwelling on it and thinking about it and obsessing about it and worrying about it. Fortunately for me, I have been left fairly physically unscathed by this. After my cardiac arrest, I was undergoing fairly intensive tests for 5 years in cardiac rehab, and every time they did the tests on me, I got more than just a clean bill of health. They were very impressed and very happy with how I was doing, and so that gives me a great deal of confidence, and that's perhaps another reason why I don't obsess over this daily. Hello.
going?
Good, how are you? Hello.
Ripley, are you doing this?
Oh no. As I edited this video and I listened to Ted and Rob's stories once more and I reflected on my own, it occurred to me what a huge role luck had played in all of our survivals. And if the stars weren't aligned in quite the same way, if certain people weren't in certain places and timing was slightly off, one or more of these stories could have had a much more tragic end. And it's that I hold in mind when I think about the 8.5 years since my cardiac arrest, and I think about all the things that have happened and all the things that I've achieved, and any feelings that I might have of self-doubt or any trauma that I have related to my cardiac arrest is just washed away when I think about how incredibly lucky that I am to have had that 8.5 years, and that is a constant inspiration to me. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up, hit that like button down there at the bottom, and also consider subscribing and following me on my next adventures. And I'll see you on the next ride.